Good morning and welcome to day 35. Day 35 of the 40-day fast for marriage and families. Guys, as always, I want to thank you all so much. Like we're already 35 days in to the 40-day fast, and I want to thank you all for being a part of this fast. I want to thank you for loving and cherishing your marriage and your family and yourself enough to become a part of this process and allow God to do what not only that he wants to do in your marriage and in your family and in your life, but allowing him to do everything that your heart desires for him to do in this season, in this period, in those areas of your life. Listen, God's heart is set towards your marriage. It's set towards your family. It is set towards your life. If you could know and feel the love that he has for you, for your marriage and for your family, listen, you may not believe it, but trust me, God's love for you can't even be measured, and his heart for your marriage and your family, and to see those things bloom and blossom and become everything that he's designed it to be, oh my goodness, it is just nothing can compare to it. And so guys, I thank you that you treasure your marriage and you honor your family and respect your life enough to be a part of this process and to let God do in you and through you what he desires to do. Listen, the harvest, you may not see it all now, but the harvest that's going to be reaped through this process. Yes, just like we talked about the other day about having to call your friends, having to text them and all this other kind of thing so that they can come and help you, gather up everything that God produces from this process. Yes, that's going to be the testimony. And listen, I thank God for this process. And I can only imagine the changes that it's making in your life, in your heart. Because even as I'm going through this process, listen, the changes in my own heart. There are a lot of things that God has told me to check during this process, and I'm doing my best to be obedient in checking those things. There are times when, I'm crying, and I'm repenting, and not just on, I think it was like day 4 or something like that when that was the word that came forth about repenting. Listen, repentance is a daily thing because we don't always do what it is that we should do every time that we should do it. So listen, I keep telling you all, and I will continue to say, if you find yourself, I'm sorry, it feels like a piece of hair or something is on my face, but if you find yourself in a place and it seems like you're stuck, or if you have found yourself in that place and it seems like, oh, I don't know if I can go farther, listen, yes, God has already ordained strength in you. God has already prepared everything and equipped you with everything that you need to go through this process. We're on day 35. 5 more days. 5 more days. And I believe that even after this process ends, there's still more that God has for us. And that more, remember we talked one day about how Jesus was speaking to the crowd, and they were all happy about what God was saying, and then they left, and there were a few that stuck back along with the disciples, and they said, okay, God, we know that there is more, and we need to know what that more is, so please give it to us. So even after this process ends, even after these 40 days end, that is still the position that we must be in. We can't just spend this time with God and believe that, okay, whatever he said in 40 days is all that I need to know. No, that is not it. That's not it. If that was the case, then he would have been stopped speaking a long time ago. He would have been stopped speaking even before the 40 days started. There is a place in God that he wants us to seek him out for individually And so even after these 40 days are over, that's the position that our hearts have to remain in. God, we have to continue seeking him. We have to continue seeking him, because even the things that he's spoken in these 40 days, there is so much more to it. There is so much more to it. And we won't know the depth of everything if we don't seek it out. If we don't seek God out for the depth of everything that he's already released in this period, in this time, then there is so much that we're going to miss. And we talked one day about basically not knowing that you've been invited to the feast. Well, now you've been invited to the feast, and there is nothing in the feast that is off limits to you. And it's almost like walking into a place, walking into a building, and what you see up front, what you can see with your eyes just by standing in the door, there's more behind that. But if you stay right there at the door and you never go forward, you never walk forward into the building so that you can see everything that entails, then you're going to miss something. Even though your eyesight might be good, and from the door you may think that you can scan the room and know everything that's in it, there's always more. And so we always have to keep our heart in a place to where God is able to give us that more. We have to keep our hearts in a place of continually seeking God. And listen, it's not just like that when it comes, to our marriage, our family, our lives. It's even that way when it comes to our spiritual life. And it takes that. It takes that and so much more. We have to continually seek him. And as long as we continually seek him in our spiritual life, in these areas, he's going to continuously reveal to us even more. Never get to the place where God is no longer revealing, where God is no longer instructing, or where we can no longer hear. So day 35, we still have 5 more days to go. Yes, the fast itself will end, but keep your hearts in that position. Keep your heart in that place to where, whether you're on your job, whether you're sleeping at night, no matter what you're doing, that God can always speak to you, that God can always correct you, that he can always instruct you, because that is the way that you continue to grow your relationship with him, your relationship with your spouse, your relationship with your family, your relationship with other people in general. Okay? All right, so day 35. And guys, as always, we are praying every single day. Our expectation is like on 1,000,000. Our expectation is like on 1,000,000, and that's just the expectation for your lives, for your life, for your family, your marriages. Like our expectation is so, I think it was like day 5, something like that. God said, and the words that came was anticipation, expectation. And I think on day 6, it was acceleration. Listen, we're expecting for you. And we're already anticipating, and we're already rejoicing. We were rejoicing since day 5. And probably before day 5, we've been rejoicing. And that is what you do when you already know what the promise of God is. You don't wait until it happens. No, you go ahead and thank God and praise him for it right then. Because as soon as he says it, it is so. I don't care what it looks like, what it feels like, what it tastes like, what it smells like, what it seems like. I don't care about none of that stuff. The moment that God says it, so the moment he instructs you, the moment he releases that promise into your heart, listen, it is already so, just as he has spoken it. Okay? All right, so let's go ahead with day 35. And day 35, I want to start, day 35 is intimacy. Day 35 is intimacy. And I want you all, I want to read from the Message translation. Yeah, I think I want to read from the Message first, but I'm going to be bouncing between the Message and the Amplified. And we're talking about intimacy. We're talking about intimacy. And we're not just talking about intimacy with God. But do you realize, I want to, before we read this, your intimacy with Christ is the same as your intimacy with your spouse. Your intimacy with Christ, it is the exact same, or it should be the exact same as your intimacy with your spouse. And you know, when we talk about intimacy with Christ, we're talking about praise. We're talking about worship. We're talking about, and every single element that you need in order to be intimate with Christ are the same exact elements that you need in order for intimacy to thrive. I'm not just talking about intimacy like, you know, lay low at the door and be like, yeah, whatever. No, I'm talking about in order for intimacy to thrive in your marriage, the same elements, the same things that apply to your spiritual life when it comes to intimacy with Christ. You cannot have intimacy with Christ without fellowship. You cannot have intimacy with Christ without respect. Every single thing that we have gone through from day one through day up until this point, none of those things, if you take those things out of your relationship with Christ, it doesn't work. Your relationship lacks something. Well, listen, do you know that if you took those same elements out of your relationship with your spouse, your intimacy will lack something. It's going to lack something. It's not going to be that level that you desire. The level, listen, can I tell you something? It's not just the level that you desire. It's the level that Christ desires for you. Like, what you desire, Christ placed that in your heart. He placed it in your heart. So it's not that you're just picking something out of thin air and whoop-de-doo, I wish, I hope. No. It's already been placed in your heart by Christ. And I want you to see this, that the level of your intimacy with Christ should be the same as the level of your intimacy with your spouse. If you take something away, whether it's forgiveness, whatever elements we've already discussed in this process of marriage and family, whatever elements we've already discussed, and we've discussed a whole lot: obedience, prayer, pursuing. Not pursuing, but praying, fearing not, respecting, instructions, weapons, putting your mouth on your spouse, talking, asking, repentance. I mean, we have talked about a whole lot of things. And in your spiritual life, if any of those things are out of order, your intimacy with Christ decreases. And it's the same thing when it comes to your marriage. If any of those things are missing, if any of those things are not full, listen, God expects you to run on full capacity. And don't make any excuses, because excuses are easy to make, but just because they're easy to make doesn't make them valid. And there are so many excuses that we make, and they seem valid. Lord knows they seem valid, and it seems like everybody should understand. The only person that an excuse is valid for, the only person that an excuse does any good for, is the person who tells it. The only person that an excuse is valid for, that an excuse is good for. It's only good for the person who tells it. And we have to, this is an honest process, and we have to make up in our mind not to make excuses. We can't make excuses for nothing anymore. Because if we continue to make excuses, we will never see the changes that need to be made in our lives, our marriage, and our family. We'll never see those changes. So instead of making excuses, we have to be willing to make the change that is needed, regardless. I don't care what areas it's in. Your excuse could, everybody could understand your excuse. Everybody could understand your excuse. But remember, that excuse, it only helps you. It's only valid for you. And when we make excuses, we're not helping ourselves. When we're making excuses, we're not helping ourselves. Even though those excuses may sound valid to us and they may seem valid to other people, but we're not helping ourselves when we make excuses instead of making changes. And we have to make changes. We're on day 35. We have to make those changes. We have to make changes. Even the hard ones, we have to make changes. All right, so let's go into, I want to read 1 Corinthians 7. And now our topic for today is intimacy, sex. Yes, we're talking about intimacy. We're talking about sex. All right, and so I'm going to read from the Message, 1 Corinthians 7. I'm going to start with verse number 1, and I think I'm going to go almost through the end of verse number 6. All right, so in the Message translation, it says, now getting down to the questions you asked me in your letter. So Paul is responding back to letters that people have written to him. He says, this is the first question. First question, is it a good thing to have sexual relations? And here's Paul's response. He says, certainly, but only within a certain context. It's good for a man to have a wife and for a woman to have a husband. Sexual drives are strong, but marriage is strong enough to contain them and provide for a balanced and fulfilling sexual life in a world of sexual disorder. So he says, sexual drives are really strong. He says, but marriage is strong enough. This covenant of marriage that God has created, that God has ordained. He says, it is strong enough to contain even the strongest sexual desires, the strongest sexual drives. Marriage is strong enough to contain them and provide for a balanced and fulfilling sexual life in a world of sexual disorder. The marriage bed must be a place of mutuality. The husband seeking to satisfy the wife, and I'm going to repeat this. The marriage bed must be a place of mutuality. And Paul right now begins to explain what that mutuality is. When the marriage bed is a place of mutuality, the husband seeks to satisfy his wife. When the marriage bed is a place of mutuality, the wife seeks to satisfy her husband. And I'll continue reading. Marriage is not a place to stand up for your rights. Marriage is a decision to serve the other, whether in bed or outside of the bed. Abstaining from sex is permissible for a period of time if you both agree to it and if it's for the purposes of praying and fasting, but only for such times. He says, then come back together again. And he tells us why. Because Satan has an ingenious way of tempting us when we least expect it. Listen, God desires for your marriage to be fully balanced and fulfilling sexually. Sex is not an object or a tool that we use to hold people ransom, that we use to hold people hostage, that we use to manipulate and get what we want. You know, if you don't do this, then you're not going to get that. Sex was created for our pleasure. Excuse me. And notice what God says. He says, it is a place of mutuality. The marriage bed must be a place of mutuality, meaning you're not being selfish. This is not something that you partake in. And I don't want to be graphic. I know we're grown. But this isn't something that you partake in for your own pleasure. No, it is something that you partake in for the pleasure of the other person. I mean, it's for your own pleasure too now. Don't get me wrong. But what I'm saying is you don't enter into this place of intimacy selfishly. Like, well, I don't care if she or he, you know, isn't satisfied. All I want to do is get mine. No. Selfishness should not be a part of who we are, period. And when it comes to the marriage bed, selfishness has no place upon the marriage bed. No, your thought, your desire should be to please your husband. Your desire, your thought should be to please your wife. There has to be mutuality there. And you can't be selfish. You can't be selfish. And now I want to also read part of this from the Amplified. I want to read it also from the Amplified. And I'm going to start with verse 3 in the Amplified. It says, the husband must fulfill his marital duty to his wife with goodwill and kindness, and likewise the wife to her husband. Verse number 4 says, wife, you do not have exclusive authority over your own body. Husband, you do not have exclusive authority over your own body. Just like the husband shares authority of the body, of his wife's body with his wife, you share that same authority with your husband concerning his own body. Verse number 5, do not deprive each other of marital rights, except perhaps by mutual consent for a time, so that you may devote yourselves unhindered to prayer, but come together again so Satan will not tempt you to sin because of your lack of self-control. You know, a lot of times we may think that intimacy is not important in marriage. And listen, intimacy isn't just the physicality of sex. Intimacy is every single thing that we've already been talking about. It's not just the sex. It's not just the physical act of sex. But intimacy is every single thing that we have been talking about. Every single thing that we've been talking about. Wives respecting your husband, and husbands honoring, understanding, and loving your wife. As I said earlier, if there is something out of order, or if your love tank in Christ is not full, your love tank in intimacy will not be full. Intimacy is not a chore. It was not designed or created to be a burden. No, it was designed to be pleasurable. It was designed to be pleasurable. Just like your relationship with Christ was not intended to be boring, dull, a burden, like, oh God, I got to fellowship with you again. I got to worship with you again. Well, sometimes I just get tired of praising you. Your intimacy with Christ is going to show you. And this may sound so harsh, but your intimacy with Christ is going to show you where your intimacy is with your spouse. Whatever you're withholding from God, whatever you're withholding from Christ, trust me when I tell you, you may not believe it. Whatever you're withholding from God, you're withholding that same thing from your spouse. You are not, do you know that you cannot fully give yourself to anybody until you fully give yourself to Christ? That's why everything before day 35, before today, has been utterly important. Not just in our spiritual life, but in our marital life as well, in our family as well. How can you intimately give yourself, and when I say, I'm not just talking about laying on the bed and, y'all doing what we do. I'm not just talking about that, because the same way that it is easy to go in church on Sunday or Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, whatever day you go to church, the same way that it is easy to go into church and leave out church and not feel nothing. I'm talking about not one iota of change. Do you know that the same thing happens if you're just coming together on the marital bed and your heart isn't in it? That same emptiness that you have in your spiritual life is the same emptiness that you will find yourself having in your intimate life with your spouse, in your sexual life with your spouse. Yeah, you'll go into the bedroom and you will do what needs to be done and walk out there. Nothing will have changed. It will not have had an impact on you. And if it did have an impact, it's just like a momentary impact. Well, I felt good for 5 minutes, or listen, you can feel good for 30 minutes. But if there's anything lacking on the spiritual side, it's going to show up in the bedroom. It may not make sense, but if it's lacking in your spiritual life, it will show up in the bedroom. How can you give yourself fully to a woman that you don't respect? You can't. The same way that you cannot give yourself fully to a God that you're not submitted to. How can you fully give yourself to a man that you don't love, or that you don't respect, or that you haven't forgiven? You can't. You can't. I don't know if we really understand the impact of intimacy in both our spiritual life and our life in the bedroom with our husbands, or our life in the bedroom with our wives. Broken fellowship leads to broken intimacy. Broken fellowship with Christ, you're not paying him any attention except for on those days that you know you gotta show up. That's broken fellowship. That same broken fellowship shows itself up in our sexual lives, in our intimate lives with our spouses. It shows up. We have got to decide, and it's not just the fact that, oh, I want to please my husband, or, oh, I want to please my wife. It's not just that fact. Now, when we read out of the Message, and I'm trying to get back there now, when we read out of the Message translation, I don't want to do it like that. When we read out of the Message translation, the Message translation says, sexual drives are strong. Sexual drives are strong. But marriage is strong enough to contain them and provide for a balanced. I don't want to say that nobody wants, but I'm going to say this. Nobody wants a wife or a husband who, I'm talking about, stays in the church 24/7. I'm talking about you don't even come home because you're in the church. You know, y'all can't do nothing because your life is just all church. And when I say all church, I'm not talking about, you're at the church because you work at the church. No, I'm talking about everything is church. Like you neglect your family, you neglect everything. Blah, 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 blah. I'm talking about you just neglect it all. And it's like your life has no balance. No, Christ set this whole entire thing up so that your life has balance. If you give 100% of yourself in one particular area, the other areas of your life will suffer for it. Same way, if you give yourself 100% on the other side to something else or to anyone else, everything else in your life is going to suffer for it. God has set our lives up for us to live our lives in balance. I mean, it would be the same thing if all you did was eat all day long. Then you're not going to have room for anything else in your life. He set our lives up to be lived in balance. You cannot live a balanced and fulfilled life if the things that God has made, has created, has designed for our good, for our blessing, if we don't keep those things in balance. No excuse. No excuse. No excuse. Because it's easy to make excuses. If you're not keeping those things in balance, then that's the opportunity. Or if you feel like those things are not in balance, that's your opportunity to say, okay, God, here's something else I need teaching in. Here's something else I need instruction in. Here is something else that I need training in. And listen, don't be ashamed to ask God for help. Don't be ashamed to ask God for help. Don't think that, oh, my life is good. I don't need to ask God for. Okay, that's one way to continue to live out of balance and to continue to live an unfulfilled life. You know, when we think we have it all together and when we are too proud to say, okay, God, I don't quite know everything that I'm doing here and I need your help. I need your wisdom. I need your guidance. See, that's how you get healed. That's how healing comes. That's how the balance comes. Okay? He says, now, if you're going to, sex is not a punishment. And we can't hold it over people's head. Like, well, if you don't do this for me, then you ain't gonna get none. You have to stop making excuses about headaches. Stop making excuses. Stop making excuses. Stop making excuses. We have to, as women, we have to have a real big girl sit down, talk with our daddy, with our Father, with God. And as men, you all have to do the same thing. Mutuality. The husband seeks to please his wife. He's not seeking to please himself. No, do you know that when you please her, you actually please yourself? And that when you please him, you actually please yourself? I so wish that we had time to talk more in depth about this. But if you don't remember anything else, remember 1 Corinthians 7, verses 1 through 6. You can read it out of the Message. You can read it out of the Amplified. You can read it out of whichever translation you want to read. Like I've said this earlier on other videos, there are some things that you're not going to get fully until you take the time after the video ends and go have your own personal sit down with God so that he can give you more personal instructions for your life, for your family, for your marriage. Your spiritual relationship should not outweigh the intimate relationship with your spouse. No. Whatever is lacking in your spiritual relationship, it will show up in your intimate relationship with your spouse. How do you fix it? You correct this side. And when you correct this side, it automatically positions your heart for this side to be corrected. The same intimacy that if you currently do not enjoy the level of intimacy with Christ that you want, fix it. And you will see this be fixed too. But it's a mutual thing. It's a mutual thing. You and your husband. You and your spouse. Intimacy is so important. It's so important. It's important in your spiritual life, and God knows it's important in your married life. Render unto each other what is due to the other. You don't have exclusive authority of your body, and your husband doesn't have exclusive authority of his body. You share it together. You share it together. Remember, the two becomes one. That's not just his, and it's not just yours. Guys, I beg you, please, seek God concerning this particular segment. Seek God. I'm talking about seek him out, search him out. Not just what am I lacking in my spiritual life, God. Where am I lacking? What am I not strong at? What am I not doing in my intimate sexual life with my husband? And more than likely, one of the fixes is going to be something that we've already talked about. You can't give yourself to a woman that you don't respect or that you don't honor. Or you can give yourself to a woman you don't respect and you don't honor, but you can't give yourself. You can't give that intimate part of you that she needs as she needs it. If you don't honor, love, and understand her. And wives, we cannot. I mean, yeah, we can give ourselves to our husbands, but we can't give ourselves to him in the manner in which we need to give ourselves to him, in the manner that he needs us to give ourselves to him. If we're holding on to stuff, and if we don't respect him, there's no way we can do that. There's no way we can do that in a way that is pleasing to God. There's no way we can do it. Guys, listen, I love you. This has been day 35. Prayer doesn't stop. Prayer doesn't cease. We keep going, and we don't make excuses. We don't make excuses. Even in the hard places, we don't make excuses. No, we say, God, come in and teach and train, instruct, give us wisdom. Guys, I love you, and I will see you on day 35. Oh, I'm sorry, on day 36. I'll see you on day 36. Y'all have a blessed one.